Thanks for tuning in to another installment of the Movie Geeks United celebration of the summer of 1985 at the movies. Tonight, director Joe Dante discusses Explorers and other career highlights. Before we get started on Explorers, I wanted to ask you about the work that you did previous to Explorers. Obviously, you did most high-profile Gremlins and the Twilight Zone segment and The Howling. And you kind of mastered the genre of the horror comedy. And that's a fascinating genre for me because I would think it would be tricky to mix those two elements. Do you find that a tricky genre, or did you already have it?
I didn't find it tricky then, largely because my feeling growing up when I went to these movies was that audiences thought of them as absurd, and that if you didn't put places for them to laugh, they were going to find places to laugh because the stories were always unbelievable. And my favorite director growing up for old horror movies was James Whale, who made Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, and had a way of inserting humor into his horror films that built up the horror, then diffused it, and then built it up again. And if you see a movie like The Invisible Man, and there's a lot of scenes in The Invisible Man that lead you to laugh, and then only to be followed by some bit of violence that's kind of shocking in comparison. And subliminally, I guess I learned that lesson. And when it came time to do The Howling, which was a werewolf picture, werewolf pictures were considered kind of old hat at the time. They were basically things that people saw on the Late Late Show. And in order to make the picture relevant and get them back into the old tropes, we disguised the movie as essentially a slasher movie, but we put in a lot of humor so that the audience would, be at ease as we introduced what were essentially old-fashioned werewolf plottings that they went over a little better because they weren't villagers with torches, and they weren't going to the old scientists and saying what's a werewolf and all those typical cliches that people had learned to laugh at.
Well, I guess what fascinates me about that genre is it seems the reaction of fear and being scared is so similar a release to the act of laughter. And I guess I'm always curious how you balance those two sensibilities, if it is a balancing act, and how you're equally successful at doing both in the same piece.
Well, in order to invoke fear or to invoke humor, it involves the audience giving up a certain amount of control. And the two reactions are actually so similar that the structure of a comedy and the structure of a horror film is often quite similar.
Right. Well, after Gremlins, which was a huge success, I know that you probably had your share of offers on the table of what your next project could be. So what was the genesis of Explorers being your next project?
Well, actually, I had been offered the Batman movie by Warner Brothers after Gremlins. This was a previous incarnation of Batman, written by Tom Mankiewicz, who was a James Bond writer. And they wanted this to be their new tentpole at the time, although that word didn't exist then. And I was on board for a while, and then I realized that I just didn't really believe in Batman. I was looking forward to doing the Joker and all the accoutrements that go with the Joker, but the Batman, who at the time was living with Robin up in a hill, in a big mansion, it just was a character that I never really could quite understand. So I sort of bowed out. It was probably a big mistake. And then Paramount sent over the script from Explorers along with a person to take it back after I had read it. This was a hush-hush, top-secret project that they were only letting people read in the room. And then once you were done, you had to give the script back. And because I had found Gremlins to be an extremely exhausting movie to make, I was sort of fooled myself into thinking, well, this is a smaller movie. It's just some kids building a spaceship in their backyard. I mean, it's how big could it be? And I signed on to do it, and of course, it was a much bigger deal than I thought it was. It was a much more expensive movie than Gremlins to make, and I wasn't even the first director on the picture. They had originally had Wolfgang Peterson, was going to do the picture, but he wanted to shoot it in Bavaria. And after Paramount got a look at the Never-Ending Story, they thought that the Bavarian background was a little too foreign for what they wanted, and they wanted to make the picture here. So I had just had this hit, so they came to me, and I signed on.
Well, maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems that the studio might have been keen on making Explorers because it's post E.T., and on the surface, I guess it has elements of that. But I read in an interview where you said you almost set out to make the anti-E.T. with Explorers. Can you explain that?
Well, it's sort of built into the story. When I first read the script, it had no real third act. Basically, the kids went to outer space, met some space alien kids, and played baseball, and then went home. So it was obvious that wasn't going to work. So in coming up with a third act, it ended up being the two acts were about the kids expecting to find God in space, and then when they get there, they find, in fact, a reflection of themselves, rather than the godlike E.T. character. And so it wasn't like an intentional let's rag on E.T. It just happened to be a more secular message than I think the audience was expecting.
Yeah. And watching it again, obviously one of the main points that I'm taken with is watching these young actors just starting, Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix. And how did that audition process go, and what did you see in them? What did you recognize in them?
It's interesting that when you make movies with kids in them, there are periods in Hollywood where there are a lot of great kids, and there's periods where there's really hardly any kids. And so one of the things on Explorers was that we didn't want to use established kid actors. We wanted to find people who are natural. And it was a very long audition process. Our casting director, Gretchen Rennell, went to high school plays and summer camps and all sorts of places trying to find, kids who were new. And one day, along with some kid who came to the audition, he had brought his friend, Ethan Hawke, who was not an actor. He was just a friend of this kid who came to an audition. And I saw him sitting out in the green room, and I said, "Gee, this kid's kind of cute. You think he could act? Let's bring him in and see if he wants to act." And he had braces, and he was very gangly, and he came in. He was very charming and funny. And we thought, well, let's give him a shot. So we ended up doing extensive screen tests with various groups of kids. And Ethan managed to survive that process and actually get the lead role in the picture, even though he had absolutely no experience at all. And River Phoenix had done a TV series called Here Comes the Bride, which, so he was a little bit more of an established actor. But again, these kids were only 13 years old. And they were entirely realistic kids, which is hard to find in the movies. Most movie kids are directed to be kind of phony. And there's a whole subculture of Disney Channel kids now who come from a certain cutesy kind of acting background where they're encouraged to do that. And they don't, it doesn't travel well as they get older into other parts because they've never really learned how to be natural. They're always doing this sort of eye-batting, look at me, aren't I cute kind of thing.
Well, you as a director, is there a particular environment you like to nurture on set, or a particular style of direction that you give children to pull performances like that out of them?
Not really. I just try to keep it fun on the set so that there's not a lot of pressure. And if the kids want to improvise, I encourage that, provided it's within the range of what has to happen in the scene. And I find that the more natural they can be, the more believable they are on screen. So we don't really do lots of takes. We don't do a great deal of rehearsal because you never know when you're going to just get lightning in a bottle. I've been very lucky with kids all through my whole career. I've had a lot of
this might sound like a strange question, but this is a topic that we were actually discussing on our last show, Rick and myself, because reviewing the films of that decade of the 80s, it seems like there was a splurge of great teenage movies, and I know the kids in Explorers were on that cusp entering teenagehood. But today it seems they make great children's films for children that adults can enjoy as well, but that teen market, we don't have as many memorable films. And I'm wondering if
there's a reason for that, and it's a commercial reason. In the 80s, there was an audience for people who wanted to see pictures about young teenagers. Today, younger teenagers want to see older characters. They don't want to see younger characters, and the older characters definitely don't want to see younger characters. So you get pictures like Chris Columbus's last movie about the lightning thief, where in the original story he's 12 years old, but in the movie he has to be 17. And that's increasingly common now. That they find it very difficult to market pictures with young teenagers in them because the market just really kind of isn't there anymore.
Yeah. Rick, you actually had a question about the music in Explorers, right?
Yeah, I really loved the music that Jerry Goldsmith did, and I know that you worked with him a lot, and I was just wondering if you'd give us any insight what that was like on Explorers.
Well, the great thing about working with Jerry is that, all the while you're making the movie, if things went wrong on the set, you'd say, it's okay, Jerry will save it. And then you'd look at the rough cut and you'd fight with the studio and whatever happened, you knew that whatever the last part of the movie making was going to be, it was going to be better because Jerry was going to add the score. And that was going to move the movie up a couple of notches no matter what it was. And he never failed me. I mean, this was my third project with Jerry. And by that time, we had pretty much worked out a shorthand where I felt I'm not really that musical, but I felt no compunction about going up to him on the composer stand and saying, while we were recording, can you give me a little more of this or a little more of that and whatever. And he was always very accommodating. And it is a lovely score. It's a very period score because he was just getting into electronics, so there's a lot of synth stuff in that period. And I remember the first time I had worked with him, he would play everything on a piano, and then as the years went by, there would be more and more equipment to climb over and you would go to visit him. And then the funny thing was that at the end, the last couple things I did, all that equipment was still there, but it had all been now reduced to small components, and so you are back to the semi-empty room with just a couple of computer monitors.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that process, though, of the scoring process, because Rick makes movies. I don't make movies, but when I imagine the excitement in the process, and as much as I love film scores, I would think being there and watching the film come to life with music would be a particularly exciting time. What is that like for you?
It's something that you look forward to all during the entire making of the picture. The number of times that Jerry has gotten me out of problems that I had in the picture by putting something musically in that makes the point that maybe the actor wasn't making or the cut wasn't making it happened very, very often. And the thing about scores is that you have to do a temp score in order to be able to show it to the studio because they don't really know how to watch the movie if it doesn't have some kind of music on it. And sometimes you can even, if you're really alert, you can go to the movies and if you listen hard, you can sometimes tell what had been put on as the temp score because sometimes directors often would come up to composers and say, yeah, but what we had on the temp was really what I liked, and can't you make it more like that? And so sometimes you'll actually start to hear the basic components of what was the original temp score, and the composers hate doing that. And Jerry always hated listening to music with temp scores, but nonetheless, it's a way to say, look, I don't want you to do this music, but the feeling here, and the way this cuts, and the way this note hits on here, that's what I'm looking for. And he got to a point where he could understand that without my even having to mention it. I mean, when he would give me the score, it would do exactly what the temp score was supposed to do, but of course it would do it better.
I don't think there was a more versatile composer
Jerry was a genius. I've worked
Yeah.
with very few geniuses in my time. Rob Bottin is one of them, but Jerry was certainly the other.
Mm. Now, I know that a couple of your films and a couple of the projects that never came to fruition you had to go through some studio interference. And did that happen on Explorers? Did it turn out exactly as you wanted?
Explorers, unfortunately, was like the picture that I probably should never have made, because when I signed on, it wasn't graven in stone. We were still working on trying to make it work, but there was a release date. And when I was asked by Jeffrey Katzenberg to do the movie, he told me that there was a release date, and it was at least 3 or 4 months earlier than it should have been. But he needed a picture for a particular date. And I agreed to do it, even though I thought it was very difficult to get the picture done in that amount of time. Nonetheless, during the making of the movie, the Katzenberg and Eisner administration went off to Disney, and new people came in. And the new people looked at this already rushed movie and said, well, what's wrong with this movie is it should come out 2 months earlier. And so they basically said, stop working on it, and let's release it the way it is. And this is a movie that was in its first rough cut and hadn't had a preview yet even. And I said, just stop working on it and finish it the way it is, and so the movie is essentially a rough cut. And very often when you in this process, you go through a lot of different variations because you run it for audiences. They don't understand something. You want to clarify that. You want to shorten this. You want to do all that. We never got to do any of that stuff. Wow. So it's a very difficult movie for me to watch because all I can see is what I would have done had I had the time.
And what did we miss? What would have been done to it?
It's not so much that the story would be different as that there are permutations to the story. For instance, there are characters in the movie that are glimpsed fleetingly, like Mary Kay Place as the mother, who has, I think, one scene, who used to be a character. Used to be an actual character with a story arc. There's another character who, when they fly to the drive-in, there's a kid in a car who makes fun of the special effects on screen. Well, that's actually Ethan's brother. And he had a father, played by Lawrence Pressman, who's not in the movie at all. And there was material shot with all these people. And the end of the movie was supposed to be this sort of, it's hard to explain exactly what it was supposed to be, but it was a sort of a universal mind kind of melding scene where you got to see how the Dick Miller character connected with the kids. And anyway, it was very, very fast and tricky things had to be done to get it finished, and overdubs had to be made. And if you see the scene with the tree at the end of the picture where they're talking, and none of the things they say are what they were really saying. And the end of the movie there was a scene where it was a very nice scene where Ethan and Amanda Peterson we have this scene at a party where he gives her this hideous moon rock ring, which he thinks is beautiful. And at the end of the picture, when they're flying, we see that she's wearing the ring. But we had to cut around that because we took the other scene out. And it's just, there was another movie in there to be made, and the one that came out isn't exactly the one that I had in mind.
Well, I know that our listeners will kick me if I don't ask you. Does that footage still exist somewhere?
No. I've already made my effort and said, listen, I'd be up for nothing. I'll come in and reconstruct this for you. But they said, look, you're lucky we're putting it out at all.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Well, because it didn't. In addition to being not finished, after going through all that effort to make sure that it opened at a certain date, it turned out that date was the date of the Live Aid concert, which was the biggest concert that had ever been done at the time. And that was the weekend nobody went to the movie, so the picture completely tanked. And after all that effort, they could have waited another month, and I'm sure it would have been a better movie, and it would have made more money.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you find it painful to go back and watch this film, but when you go back and watch any of your films, are you ever able to disassociate yourself from the actual process of making it if you're watching one of your older films?
Yeah, if you haven't seen it in a while, you watch it kind of like anybody else's film. I'm a guy who can watch a lot of Hitchcock movies and not and willfully not remember what the ending is, just so that I can enjoy it again.
Yeah.
So it's not that difficult to sort of put yourself away and just try to watch the movie like a normal audience. But on the other hand, there's a lot of fun sometimes in just remembering what it was like to shoot the movie, or remembering whether that was, like when I see Inner Space, for instance, I mean, I had so much fun making that movie that it's fun to watch just to remember all the good times I had. Mm-hmm. There are other movies where you didn't have a good time, and you don't want to be reminded of what happened during the picture.
Yeah, well, we love Inner Space, too. Actually, I wanted to ask you a question from one of our listeners. His name is Nicholas, and he is a huge fan of Matinee, which I know is a very personal film for you. And he wanted to know, he says, Matinee is one of these movies that truly delighted me, yet I was surprised that it didn't do better when it was released. Did you ever think when you were making it that it was going to become kind of a cult classic?
No, you never think that when you're making a movie. In fact, all you can think of when you're making a movie is how you can get it done. And I would like to apologize to Nicholas personally for the fact that the new DVD release of Matinee has absolutely no extras on it. It's not even a trailer. And it wasn't because I didn't insist that they put on extras. It was so that they weren't going to do it. So it doesn't have any extras. But no, I didn't think about it. I just thought of it as a movie that was very personal to me because the kids in the movie were the age that I was when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and I loved all those kind of movies, and the idea of reconstructing one of them was, a lot of fun for me. And there's a couple scenes in the picture where the lead kid goes into his bedroom, and there's all this stuff, these monster magazines and posters and stuff. All my stuff from when I was a kid. So it really was a very personal movie, but what was kind of endearing about it was that when it did open, the few people who did come all brought their kids as if they wanted to say, look, this is the way Daddy used to go to the movies. We used to have these things called double features.
Right.
And kids have no concept of what a double feature is. In fact, I understood that some people walked out of Grindhouse in the middle because they didn't realize that there were two movies. Because they didn't understand what the concept of Grindhouse meant anyway.
Sure.
So, it was just a different world.
Well, we mentioned that Matinee has become a cult classic, but there's other movies in your resume that have as well. I think the biggest example is probably The Burbs. But is there something about your sensibility that makes some of these movies primed to become cult classics, do you think?
I have no idea. When The Burbs came out, it got the worst reviews of any picture that I had ever done, and most pictures that I'd ever seen. And there was literally 2 good reviews. All the other reviews were terrible. And it made a little bit of money because Tom Hanks was big at the time. But nobody could have foreseen that in 20 years later that it was going to have its own websites and it was going to have people reciting the dialogue out loud. And it's just turned into this sort of strange phenomena, which no one can account for.
Well, that's got to be the most satisfying thing, though. Not necessarily that you win opening weekend, but that your movie lives. I mean, your movies have survived.
No, that is great, and it's I've also sort of lucked into the fact that I made movies at a time when a lot of kids were seeing them who now have grown up and are introducing them to their kids, and that's why you find people like Ray Harryhausen being venerated after years of working in a comparative obscurity, where not that many people really knew who he was or what he did. But then, as the years go on and these pictures get discovered by people who pass them on to other people, then that becomes a legacy. Yeah.
Before I let you go, could you tell me a little bit about what you've been up to lately? And I know The Hole, the film you just did, it's getting an international release this month?
I made a picture in Vancouver, where unfortunately I make almost all my movies now. It's called The Hole. It's in 3D. It's a sort of a retro 80s picture, somewhat like Explorers in a way. It's from that type of movie that was being made that year. It was the science project year where all these kids did their science projects on film. And it was made in 3D, and it won a prize at the Venice Film Festival for Best 3D Film. But when we made it, we had no idea that there were going to be so many flat movies that were converted to 3D and using up the theaters. So as a result, it just hasn't come out. And I believe it's opening internationally this month, and then it's supposed to play here in the fall. provided there are any theaters available. And then the other thing I do is I have my website, Trailers from Hell, www.trailersfromhell.com, where you can see trailers for classic movies and not-so-classic movies with commentary tracks by contemporary directors and writers and filmmakers.
Yeah, that site is great fun. We love it. Is there a dream project? I mean, you've been in the business for a long time. Is there still that one dream project that you?
Well, I had a couple. I had one of them was Termite Terrace, which was a story about Chuck Jones's early days at the Warner Brothers cartoon studio.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that I learned the lesson: never write a script based on other people's characters, because Warner Brothers decided it was too serious for them, and they made Space Jam instead. So that one will never get made. And then there's one I've been trying to make for a couple of years about Roger Corman and what he went through to shoot The Trip, which is a comedy, and it's a funny script, and it's we try to get financing here, and then you get an actor, and then you lose the financing, you lose the actor, then you get more financing, but they want a different actor. And it's, coming up with your own financing is not what I usually did, and it's a new world for me. So basically, I've been spending a lot of time just going around the world looking for money, like Orson Welles.
It's just an arduous project just to get something off the ground.
Listen, everybody should realize that anybody who gets a movie made deserves some credit, no matter what you think of a movie, because it's just really not that easy to do.